every even numbered year is this 5-week mad dash sprint with a limited number of bills, but there's a lot of very meaty topics that we have to deal with.
Well, and the annual session used to be something that was like a special session that would get called, and then they changed the Constitution at some point with a proposal from the legislature to just make this annual. And as I recall, it was to deal with like adjustments to the budget, things that, just some housekeeping stuff that couldn't wait another year. And it's supposed to be largely absent of politics. And what's interesting is, because it happens always in the even numbered or political year, what has happened to that dream of this being just, consensus housekeeping, absent of hyper partisan politics?
Yeah, I don't know if that ever existed, Kevin.
Yeah, really.
I wish it was just limited to fine-tuning the budget, making adjustments, fixing mistakes from the last session. But that's not how it plays out at all.
Well, there is a mistake that's actually
there's a huge mistake. Yeah,
yes.
There's a huge mistake that hopefully we will fix. Yeah, ballot measure 110.
So that's what is center stage here, right? Because at one point it was passed by voters. I think it was signatures are gathered, right? And was put on the ballot.
Yes. Yeah, I believe it was a signature petition put on the ballot.
2020.
Yeah, and 58% of the voters. Millions of dollars were spent on that from outside interests, a lot of it by a New York-based firm, and hardly any organized opposition to that bill.
Yeah, even though there were definitely people we know had reservations about it, like deep ones, right?
Very deep reservations. I think a lot of us thought, well, there's no way in the world that crazy bill can pass.
Yeah.
But it did. A lot of people really didn't read it. And I would encourage everybody to read every initiative petition in detail before.
Well, not just that, but there's a ballot title, right? It's just like when you and I look at the news, we don't read every article. We just kind of browse through and like, oh, I know what's going on in the news because I saw the subject of the title of an article, right?
Yeah. This was Drug Addiction Treatment and Recovery Act. Well, yeah, who doesn't want to treat drug addiction? Oh, and we're going to dedicate funding toward it. Oh, that's great.
And we're going to tax cannabis.
Yeah, we're going to use cannabis money. Okay. Oh, by the way, we're also going to decriminalize drugs. Oh. So why are people going to go get treatment?
Yeah, really.
And then we timed it at a point when fentanyl, this incredibly addictive, dangerous, deadly drug, comes out. Fentanyl. Also at a time when our border is completely out of control, and all these things have piled up. So ballot measure 110 didn't create the homeless problem, didn't create the drug problem, but it's made it much, much worse.
It poured fuel on it, and
poured fuel on a fire.
Yeah, and it also took, didn't it take many urban areas that weren't dealing too well with the homelessness and addiction that already existed before that came along, and just overwhelmed the somewhat diminished resources that law enforcement had and the services that didn't yet exist, and many of which still don't exist, right?
Well, we did two things with law enforcement. We pulled money away from law enforcement. With the thinking was, well, we're going to save all these law enforcement dollars by treating drug addiction in this new way, so they don't need this money. So that money, which was being routed through the counties, was pulled out and allocated toward drug addiction treatment and recovery. At the same time, we tied the hands of law enforcement. We decriminalized drugs, so they have no tools at their disposal to prevent open air outdoor drug use like we see today. And there's a fine, but they're not paying the fines. There's a program for you to call and get treatment, and literally nobody is going to get. No one is using that program. So what we've seen is actual drug treatment has gone down since ballot measure 110.
Which is ironic, except it's not, because you no longer could come in front of, say, a drug court and a judge, and they say you've got a choice: you either go to treatment or you go to jail.
Yeah,
And now once they took that away, they couldn't be compelled to do anything.
right.
And of course, this is the same time that there was this movement kind of in the wake of the George Floyd riots where they decriminalized crime, and they had DAs that came in and said, you know what, let's take petty crime and just not do anything about it. And this, together with Measure 110, didn't that kind of create the super crime wave that's engulfed cities that didn't have the law enforcement resources to deal with the things before the crime wave?
It's absolutely aggravated it, and everybody in law enforcement will tell you that. And the sad thing is, I think the folks here are driven out of compassion. They said, well, we shouldn't make criminals out of people who are addicted to drugs. The thing is, nobody wants these folks to go to jail. We want these folks to get treated and get in their right mind. And human nature, if you understand human nature, it's a carrot and a stick approach. They're not, when you're in a fentanyl stupor, you're not going to volunteer to go get treatment. Very few people do. And that's what we're seeing. And
yeah, so, you're talking to the addiction and not a rational person at that point, right?
Right. And I've talked to a lot of recovered drug addicts, and they'll tell you that that's the drugs talking. When you go to a person on the street and you say, hey, are you okay? Would you like to get help? No, I'm fine. That is the drugs talking. And the folks I've talked to, so many of them, the only reason they're clean, the only reason they're alive is because they faced a choice. They were either going to jail or they were going to get treatment, or they went to jail. And for the first time, they got in the right mind, or for the first time in a long time, because they were away from the drugs and realized I need to change something because my life's going downhill. So that system that we had helped many, many people. And what's most amazing to me is the groups that are saying that we need to decriminalize drugs. A lot of the leaders in those groups, they're recovered drug addicts, and the reason they're clean is because they went through that programs like that.
Yeah, it's ironic.
Now they come back and say, well, those programs are too hard. We're asking too much. In fact, we shouldn't even expect people to get clean. We should, if a clean needle is part of your road to recovery, we need to acknowledge that some people, they really feel this, that some people don't want to get clean. They just want to use drugs in a more regulated way. Maybe limit their drug use, but continue to use drugs. So that is part of the recovery path. And what we're saying is no. The compassionate thing to do is to help people that are addicted to drugs. They need our help to get off drugs. And sometimes that means requiring treatment.
Yeah, it's tough love, which is dealt by the justice system in this case, mostly because many of these folks have come to blows with the justice system. And then when you add that to the fact that these habits are often fulfilled by committing petty crimes. Well, I don't even know if they're petty crimes, because car theft, burglary, these are felonies. And so even though there's a debate going on about what possession should be defined as, petty crimes, yeah, that's, stealing a pack of chewing gum, but it's not stealing someone's car and assaulting them in the process.
Yes.
And it's not breaking into a business and threatening them, at the point of a gun to give you the money that's in the register. But that happens all the time now in many urban areas, especially Portland, and they don't have police that can adequately respond to because there's just too much of it. Now, isn't it true also? And I've borne witness to this in many of the firsthand reports I've gotten to uh, see and hear, but a lot of people came from out of state to Oregon in order to take advantage of this climate.
Yeah, we offer a lot of things. If we offer free healthcare, there's no residency, really a residency check. You just say you check a box that says you live in Oregon or you have the intent to live here, and there's a process that you're streamlined. You've got healthcare. We're offering places to stay. We offer food. And then we're not criminalizing drugs, so you're free to use the drug of your choice out in public with no accountability. And the other thing, I think people felt, well, this shouldn't be a crime because the only one that's being heard is the individual. It's their individual choice. We need to be tolerant. If they choose to do this behavior, it's none of my business, but it is my business. They are doing this in my kids' and grandkids' parks.
Yeah.
They are disrupting, my ability to walk down the street, like going to stores. There is a societal impact for this kind of behavior that goes well beyond the individual. And that needs to be reflected and appreciated in our laws. And it also impacts the parents and the families of these folks that are addicted to drugs. I couldn't say this 2 years ago, Kevin, but I've lost a family member and 2 family friends to fentanyl. And I never lost anybody to drugs before that. And so this impacts a lot of people. This isn't just some individual choice that's isolated. It's impacting our communities and our families. And there is a role for the state to make sure people get treated.
Well, and so Measure 110 was kind of deceptive in how it was marketed, how the ballot title, what it chose to emphasize and not. And I know that I've talked to people that said that they thought it was about pot, smoking pot, and which was already decriminalized. These are deadly drugs, some of which just a few uses or even one use can be fatal, and they're the most addictive that they could be. So, and Bobby Richardson here was saying that her son got clean. One of our super
That's
fans,
awesome.
and
That's awesome.
There are people that have found the right path and gotten clean. We seem to have a system that's kicked in an entire industrial complex that seems to be there to service and support the continued use of these drugs. And so with tents and, food and water and really kind of a protection racket that exists too. And then on top of that, you've got all these things that are being built to house people, but a lot of it, these folks really, they're either not interested in it or it won't do anything to solve their problem. It could actually make things worse because it would just take them into a setting where it might be hidden. And as I understand it, because of a court decision, arresting drug dealers is super difficult. So all these different aspects all came together at the same time, and you really can't stop it unless you finally change the laws.
Yeah, the getting drug dealers is difficult, and we have a fix for that. But my understanding of it is that you almost have to catch them in the act. And so the Boyd fix says, hey, if you're walking around with a big pile of drugs, you probably have the intent of selling those drugs. So you are going to be convicted as being a drug dealer based on the evidence that is on your body at the time. So I think that's what the Boyd fix is essentially trying to do.
Yeah. Which still requires that you have the law enforcement resources to do it.
You got to have law enforcement. Right.
And of course, as long as there's a clientele that's streaming into the state, even from other places, it creates an incentive, even with these stricter laws, for someone to continue to maybe deal those drugs. I think an assistant DA in Washington County once explained to me that you could catch somebody with a bunch of drugs, with little balloons, which I guess they use to dispense or to
Yeah.
sell drugs, burner phones, and all the other paraphernalia that a drug dealer would have. But unless you actually witness the transaction, you couldn't arrest the drug dealer, which meant they just go in the tents that are given to them for free, and they do it there.
Right. So that we do have a fix for that, and I'm a chief sponsor on a bill, House Bill 4036, that I think is a great bill, and it essentially ends Measure 110.
Well, that's what this is coming down to. By the way, I did want to mention this. You mentioned earlier on that this $100 ticket really wasn't getting the trick done. There's Oregon Catalyst had an article that the title of it says 50 of 382,000 addicts got help with Measure 110. 50. And that's the $100 ticket that you have to pay technically, but can be waived if you call a hotline in order to get help. But apparently no one's calling that hotline. Even if they do, they aren't getting treatment. And they said between February 2021 and September 2023, law enforcement officers issued 6,271 tickets for drug possession, but only 499 people, 8%, called the hotline, and only 1 in 10 received treatment, or about 50 people.
Yeah. It's pathetic. There are folks that are getting treatment outside of that system, and Oregon Health Authority has a dashboard now where you can go and look. You got to be careful what you're looking at, because some people think a clean blanket, a clean needle, and some clean foil and a business card
is drug treatment.
And hey, yeah, that's treatment. That's the road to recovery right there. And unfortunately, your tax dollars are being used to pay for that. The Oversight and Accountability Council, which was established as part of Ballot Measure 110, is the body that oversees how this funding is distributed. And they have spent a few $100 million of your tax dollars on some good programs. I would support some of these programs, but other ones are boondoggles. They've given money to groups that have never received government money before, have no track record of treating. And the other part is the Oversight and Accountability Council, their priorities. I just don't agree with their priorities. They don't prioritize long-term treatment.
Yeah, getting off drugs.
They believe in destigmatizing drug use. They don't believe that that getting clean is the goal. They don't believe in required treatment. They are all in on harm reduction techniques, like the clean needles and clean foil. So we have some serious structural problems as a result of Ballot Measure 110. And I think that a bill that I'm part of goes a long way to turning this thing around.
You know, destigmatizing seems to speak mostly to self-esteem and feelings of belonging in society and stuff like that, which that is the least of the problem of somebody who's addicted to fentanyl or meth, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I would think so. But some cities, I haven't seen them in Portland yet, but I think San Francisco and New York, there's billboards, posters that say, I use drugs, but I do it safely. Or, when you use around your friends.
Yeah. So you can have the Narcan ready, right?
Yeah. And somebody mentioned here, I think it was Lori. Yeah. We're putting our first responders in harm's way. They're having to do double, triple doses of Narcan to bring some of these folks around.
Wow.
Our law enforcement and our first responders, I swear the bulk of their time is spent dealing with this epidemic. And instead of helping their communities in the many other ways that they need help,
with other health emergencies,
they are just responding to personal crisis after personal crisis due to drugs.
Yeah. And of course, all that got thrown into one big bucket called a behavioral health crisis.
Yeah.
It's a crisis caused by one's behavior, that is just it's a medical thing only, as
Yeah.
opposed to something that goes deeper about a person's choice of what they're going to do and how they're going to conduct their life. It has had a big impact on society. It's been very expensive. The same Oregon Catalyst article says that about $250 million in Measure 110 funds clearly have not helped as intended. We know there's additional funds in places like Portland through Metro, Multnomah County, and the city of Portland that have also gone into this. So we're talking billions when we get down to it.
Oh yeah.
And it's not working. It's having the opposite effect. So now this has forced the politicians in Salem to deal with this. And even in a short session where normally you'd think, well, that's a lot to do in a short period of time, because you've only got 4 weeks and bills have to make it through in a certain form within like a week or 10 days or something. So what are the two sort of competing versions of what needs to be done?
Yeah. Well, first off, I'll say we saw this. I'm a first-time legislator. I just went through my first long session. We introduced bills that were directed at fixing this problem. None of those bills were heard.
No hearing.
No hearings on those bills that would have repealed ballot measure 110 in its entirety, for example, that would have recriminalized drugs. No, those bills were never heard. But what's happened is just the legislative majority, the Democrat majority. I gotta clarify. They do not, on these issues, they are not representing the majority of Oregonians. They're not
People,
representing many Democrats, a lot of independents, a lot of Republicans. They're not representing when they do this, because what's happened since the long session, there's been polling that shows overwhelmingly Oregonians want to recriminalize drugs. Overwhelmingly, Oregonians want to require treatment. And then there's been a lot of national press about what Portland's turned into. So the Dems in the legislature realize they need to do something, because if they don't, there's a ballot measure waiting in the wings that will go back, that will effectively, it's called a fix on ballot measure 110. It is a repeal in many terms. It keeps the funding, but everything else changes.
Yeah.
So they know that ballot measure is waiting there. So they have been dealing with this internal battle with their progressive, very progressive side of their party, with a lot of funding out of New York, the Drug Policy Alliance, which is just adamant about decriminalizing drugs, and they're putting dollar after dollar into Oregon to promote that idea. And then the more moderate folks that realize this ain't working, and it's not going to work, and we need to have some carrot and stick approach to make it work. So they feel like they've come up with this compromise. Republicans haven't been involved in it. I hate to say it. There's a committee, and there's Republicans and Democrats on there, but there's a lot of discussion that's going on behind the scenes outside of that committee,
where the real decisions are being made.
Real decisions are being made, and they're not considering what, in my view, what Oregonians are demanding and what experts are recommending. That's not being considered. But they have a bill. It's House Bill 4002, and I'll talk about one major element of that bill, and there are some good pieces to it. But one major element that makes it a complete non-starter is that they say they're recriminalizing drugs by making a Class C misdemeanor and requiring a deflection program. So what that means is Class C misdemeanor could be up to 30 days in jail. And then, but before they can be charged for that, they have to be offered treatment,
Right.
deflection. So the law enforcement deflects them. And if there is no appropriate program within their area, they can't get charged for a crime. So, or if they choose not to do deflection, to go through the program, after a period of time, they can be charged with a Class C misdemeanor, up to 30 days.
Which, yeah,
And
up to 30 days of time served, basically.
well, they would spend some jail time. Realistically, it's probably 4 to 5 days. I mean, it's not going to be a full 30 days. So here's the problem. They're admitting that we need a carrot and stick. That their people, the voters are demanding recriminalization, but they're doing this with a wink and a nod to their progressive base because they know it's a big nothing burger.
Yeah.
This
It's window dressing. It's some
it
symbol
won't
of
do
kabuki
anything.
dance.
It's not much more than a traffic ticket. And we know this because the League of Oregon Cities, the Oregon sheriffs, the Oregon chiefs of police, and the DAs, they're the ones tasked to carry this out, to carry this Class C misdemeanor and deflection program out. And they're telling us, I'm looking at the letter right here. They're telling us it won't work. It will not work. It's so complicated. It will not work. We cannot make this work. So when they tell you we've recriminalized it, we have this program in place based on evidence, that's BS. The people who are responsible for carrying out that are telling us in no uncertain terms, it will not work. What our bill, House Bill 4036, is recommending is a Class A misdemeanor with diversion. Diversion is like when you think of if somebody's busted for drunk driving, that's a diversion program. It goes through the courts. So you do face a criminal charge. A Class A misdemeanor is up to a year in jail. But you have the opportunity for diversion, to go through treatment. And if you do the right things and you go through treatment, your record will be expunged. It'll be taken off your record. And this program, Class A misdemeanor with diversion, is what's being recommended by
the sheriff
and cities, the sheriffs, the chiefs of police, and the DAs. They came out with a long list of recommendations based on their experience. And our bill 4036 basically implements their list of recommendations. So that is one huge difference between the Democrat solution and the Republican solution. And I call theirs it's a fake fix. It pretends to recriminalize, and it's in effect going to do nothing.
So I'm just typing it in here so folks can see it. So it's House Bill 4002, right? That is the fake Measure 110 fix. And it's the one that has the Class C misdemeanor. And it's with, what did you call that they do? It's not diversion, it's
deflection.
Deflection.
So deflection, it's a process that would take place before you can charge the person with the crime, which makes it really tough for law enforcement to deal with.
That makes, I mean, yeah, obviously when somebody's doing this stuff, they know they're pretty much not going to face any consequences. And we won't know until much later whether anybody actually really does.
Right. And this is not a bill to be referred to the voters. This would be an act. Both of these are potentially acts by the legislature. I saw that question come up. And the bill, I'm referring to House Bill 4002. Nobody's actually seen the bill yet. It's still being worked. I have a 3-pager that goes through the main bullet items that are supposed to be elements of this bill. Our bill, House Bill 4036, on the other hand, has been thoroughly vetted. It's written in detail. It's available. It hasn't been posted on OLIS yet, but it's been available for a few weeks. And there's a lot of great elements to that bill that not only recriminalize, but redirect our funding toward real evidence-based treatment solutions minimizing the harm reduction. There's a place for some harm reduction tools, but less emphasis on that, more emphasis on real treatment facilities, especially for youth, and recovery services.
And then, of course, recriminalizing effectively drug dealing, making it actually possible.
Yes,
Right.
making it possible to go after the drug dealers. So that Boyd fix we mentioned earlier, that is an element of our bill. The Democrats also include that as an element of their bill. But the Boyd fix combined with the Class A misdemeanor, what the Class A misdemeanor does, when you're facing a year in jail, you have way more incentive to do two things. One is to get treated. You don't want to go to jail. Two, give up your dealer. Give up the folks that put you in this mess. Class C, it's not going to do that. It just won't.
Yeah.
So you talk to anybody in law enforcement, Class A, and again, their goal isn't to put people in jail. Their goal is to get people treated. And Class A will do it. Class C will not.
So we're one big experiment paid for by somebody in the Drug Policy Alliance in New York that is still trying to keep the experiment going, and we're the only one of this type in the United States, right? Because everybody thought, well, it's like that we're exactly like Portugal. We're the small and progressive, so we'll do it.
We're the petri dish, and this out-of-state money spent millions of dollars to get ballot measure 110 passed. I was just on their website today. The Drug Policy Alliance is making a big deal about pushing against recriminalization, and they're spending, again, I don't know how much, but I'm sure it's in the hundreds of thousands of dollars to try and convince Oregonians not to recriminalize.
Where do they get their money, by the way? Is that a kind of a Soros thing, or
George Soros is a big supporter of the Drug Policy Alliance. I'm not sure who else, but they have some very deep pockets. Clearly, people who don't have to live with this every day, who aren't walking the streets of Portland, who don't have shops in downtown Portland, who aren't trying to take their kids to the park, they're putting up the money for this.
Yeah, we're a grand experiment on someone else's state, right?
Yeah, and when we get compared to Portugal, that's really not an appropriate comparison. Portugal had a much different drug scene than Portland did, or than Oregon did, facing decriminalization. And even today, fentanyl is not on the streets in Portugal.
Yeah, they still don't have fentanyl, right?
Oh, no, they don't. It's a totally different animal. They even have stricter marijuana laws than Oregon does. So I just don't buy into this comparison. They don't have the long history of drug use that we have. So it's really a lousy comparison.
Well, and I remember watching one of these boards that were organized by the City Club in Portland, and they had people on. We're basically all on one side, except for one guy who was with ORCOPS, which is the sort of the
Oregon Chief of Police.
Yes, and he said, Aaron Schmautz is his name, and he said he was asked actually, what is how do they in Portugal? What is their level of policing that they have? Like, do they have enough law enforcement to do this? And he said, it's funny you ask, because the number of officers per thousand population in Portugal is the same as what the FBI recommends for every city in the country. And Portland, for example, is at about half that amount.
Is a fraction of that. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that, we've got a lot of problems. And frankly, repealing ballot measure 110 isn't the whole fix. We need to refund police. We need to build up our police. We need to have the drug treatment capacity, because we are short on treatment facilities in this state, not just for drug use, but mental illness. And those two things really overlap as well. So there's a lot of aspects to this, but this bill, House Bill 4036, goes a long way in the road to Oregon's recovery out of this mess that we put ourselves in.
Well, there's another issue I thought we might try to touch upon tonight with the time that we have, because I know that so this is the main act, right, in the state legislature. I don't know if there's any others you want to mention. I wanted to get to discuss a little bit about energy because I have no idea if that's going to
Yeah.
be covered, but it's in front of people.
Yeah, I don't think we're facing any major energy bills in the short session. There's a number of things that I'm working on, but I'm happy to talk about energy. Yeah.
Well, I think
we're, especially since we just experienced some interesting things with electricity or lack thereof.
no, that's right. And
Yeah.
you've been on this issue, and I think a lot of people just found out what it was like to not have energy, and certainly not have electricity. Which haven't we been encouraged to electrify everything to the point that we will be much more dependent on the very grid that failed because some ice got on trees and the wind blew?
Yeah, we are. There's a big push to electrify, to eliminate alternative sources of fuel and energy. Natural gas is a big one. We're seeing efforts underway to ban natural gas, to, when you're doing a new housing development, to not include them, not run natural gas pipes out to those new homes. And they're vilifying natural gas as if it's some dangerous toxin that we've been using to cook with forever with a ventilator. But apparently it's been killing people all this time, and I had no idea.
Yeah.
So
Cold can kill people, by the way.
cold can kill people.
Yeah.
So I think that what we went through highlights a very important point. If we lose power, I like having an alternative energy source. I like having an electric generator that I can power the electric lights and things in my house. We had a bill last session that was oriented to ban
Just to ban it. Yeah.
gas-powered generators, among other things. Yeah. And I think that having an alternative fuel like natural gas is a great thing. I talked to many people. Their power went out, but they still had heat because they had the kind of dual fuel furnace that could run on natural gas, or they had a natural gas fireplace, and they could still cook and eat. So two important things when it's really cold outside.
Cook and eat.
Yeah. So the other aspect of this, Kevin, you and I have talked a lot about, is we are funding a lot of green sources of energy, solar and wind. We're talking about offshore wind. But what are we not investing in where we should? And that's the actual grid, the infrastructure. We've got overhead power lines that when the wind blows, sparks fly, or when it's icy and the wind blows, trees come down on them. We're not investing in that, especially if we go to more and more electric vehicles, rely more on electricity. We already know that our grid is insufficient. And so the other thing we know is we're seeing a huge increase in our utility bills. What did Portland just get hit by? Like 18% increase, while at the same time they're going without power due to infrastructure. And what a time to jack the prices up. And people were really upset with PG&E CEO, blah, blah, blah. We got to remind people, for the most part, they're doing what the legislature is telling them to do.
Yeah, they're highly regulated and controlled. Yeah.
The legislature has mandated we will be carbon free by 2050. Everybody knows that is a ridiculous timeline. Number one, it can't be achieved. It won't be achieved. The other thing is, if you let's say you agree that we do need to decarbonize. If we gave it another 40 years, let's say we put it out at 2090, what's the net global impact, global temperature impact? It's negligible. It's nothing.
Yeah.
So we're spending a lot of money, a lot of time and treasure, Oregonians' tax dollars, on something that is not providing us any benefit. Wall Street Journal just did a great article yesterday. It called it climate suicide.
Hmm.
We are, by following, we're doing all these things, taking all this money, and what they said, committing climate suicide for no benefit, no climate benefit whatsoever.
Well, so they're also, aren't we in this state and nearby states taking hydroelectric dams away, which were one of the major sources of electricity? It relied upon something highly renewable, which is gravity and water. We
Yeah.
get a fair amount of rain, and then that drives these hydroelectric dams. They're getting rid of those at the same time that they're saying we need more electricity, and they're replacing it with something that is nowhere near as reliable, like windmills and offshore wind, which a lot of people are very upset about,
Yeah.
and solar.
Yeah. There is a move to tear out a number of dams. And some of these dams have been in for decades and decades. And there's no solid plan that I've seen to replace that energy. And some of these dams, Kevin, these dams are flood control. Yeah, they produce energy, but they also provide flood control. They provide recreation. So they're a lot more than just producing electricity. Uh, so, yeah, I couldn't be more opposed to tearing out dams. It makes no sense to me. And I'm pretty sure that if Oregon and the Department of Energy is putting a plan together right now, is my understanding, to look at what a carbon-free future looks like. And I think they're going to get to the point where they can't do it on wind and solar alone. Nuclear power has to be part of that solution. And I know you're a big advocate of nuclear power, as am I, especially the new modular reactors. But it'd be crazy to tear out the dams.
Well, and so on nuclear power, I think some folks probably don't know the history of this because it was so long ago. They probably don't even know the recent history on how things have changed with it. But you're one of the leaders on the forefront of trying to get this potentially even bipartisan support for bringing forward nuclear as an option. I know that at
Yeah.
the state platform convention for the Republican Party, we were involved with working together to place this as a specific plank in a new section that was added to the platform, statement of principles and beliefs that the party and its candidates are advocating for, to make nuclear power something that we bring back. And there were some reasons for that, because what was it, 1980? That's when, in the aftermath of 3 Mile Island and a lot of other technologies that were fairly old even then, that we were relying upon, that had people concerned. The Hanford facility up in Washington State, correct?
Yeah.
And that also, but now we're in a new era. Just like you wouldn't willfully buy a car from 1965 and say, I think this thing's perfectly safe, compared to a 2024 model of a car. There's even more advancement in the nuclear realm. So what are some of the things that people need to know about the history, and then what can be done about changing this now? Because obviously that's something that if there's a compromise between Democrats and Republicans and they want carbon-free electricity and we want to have enough electricity to survive and afford, this might be it.
Yeah. So historically, you want to know the history in Oregon or how we got here?
Yeah, kind of how we got here in Oregon, since that's what we can maybe fix here.
Yeah. So was it back in the 80s or 90s where Oregon had a ballot measure?
I think it was 1980, exactly 1980.
Went in front of the voters. That was before my time in Oregon, but went in front of the voters to say until we have a permanent uh, repository for nuclear waste, no nuclear energy will be allowed in the state. And so that is uh, that ballot measure is what we've been living with since that time. So Oregon cannot build any nuclear power facilities. We're restricted because of that. Now, since that time, we do have a nuclear reactor at one of our universities, at Oregon State University.
Yeah.
And we have a great nuclear energy program there. And a spinoff from that is a company that called NuScale, which has been on the forefront of developing small scale modular nuclear reactors. There's a few other outfits that are doing that as well. Westinghouse is one of them. And this technology is great. It is scalable and modular. The idea is to have a standardized reactor design that can be approved once and shorten the regulatory cycle that it takes to build one reactor after another.
Which can take decades, right?
It can take decades. It can take decades. The other thing is they've figured out how to design these things so that they can be completely disconnected from the grid. You might have heard people in fear about Ukraine, the Russians bombing and disconnecting one of their nuclear reactors from the grid and having a meltdown.
Yeah, because they needed the grid to keep it cool.
To keep it cool, right. That is not a concern with today's modern reactors. They can be completely disconnected from the grid. And they have a passive control system, which fails safe in that it cools down. It doesn't require power to cool down. It cools down just based on the very simple design of the reactor itself. And our own agencies have decided that these reactors are so safe that you can build on a 20-acre parcel, and outside that 20-acre parcel, they're not even concerned about monitoring for radiation.
Because it's that safe and controlled.
Reliable and that safe. And you could, I think the math I did a while back, 40,000 acres of solar panels, the energy that produces on a sunny day, you could have 24/7 on 15, 20-acre nuclear reactor parcels.
Wow.
So which is more environmentally friendly, really? Which is more environmentally friendly? Are we going to chew up tens of thousands of acres for solar panels? I mean, that's acreage for farming, acreage for wildlife, acreage for houses. So do we eat up thousands of acres for that, or do nuclear? The other thing is, I think we have a pretty good track record of safely storing nuclear waste.
Yes.
We have decades of that. What went on at Hanford is a problem. And I know a little bit about that because I've worked up there. The reason that we have a waste problem at Hanford is because we were in a race to develop a nuclear bomb.
Yeah, that was not nuclear energy for electricity.
And so some shortcuts were made on how the waste was disposed of. And I think if they had to do it all over again, they wouldn't have dug a hole in the ground, lined it with concrete, and then dumped buckets of who knows what in there. But that's what they did.
Yeah.
And so now we have these underground containers that have shifted around and stuff. They have some cracks and we have seepage. That has to be dealt with. But when you talk about the storage of the nuclear waste from nuclear power plants, and the United States still has a number of them, we have a great track record of safety for that.
Yeah, and even the nuclear accidents that have happened in the past haven't involved like huge numbers of casualties of people being injured or killed.
Yeah.
And so when you introduce an element of logic and try to apply mathematical risk factors to these things, people it's become an emotional thing when in fact Now we have to think very rationally, because unless we want life to be like it was during the ice storm, but without ice storms, or just simply unable to afford it, right? I mean, if it becomes to the point where this is like a luxury to be able to afford electricity that you can rely upon in an era where we're supposed to be advancing towards more dependency on this,
Yeah.
then we have to think logically about this. And you think this might be the time, because the bill that you had talked about, I think before, was to put it back to the voters for a vote. Is that right?
That's right. Yes. So I chief sponsored that with Senator David Brock Smith, and he's brought it to the legislature a few times. I was really happy to join him on this. Yeah, it would have brought it back to the voters to repeal the constitutional amendment they passed in the 80s, and that's all it would take to allow. And I don't know if the Oregon voters are there yet. I think there needs to be a little more education on where nuclear energy is today. But I believe they can get there, and I can say that there's bipartisan support for this, which I was really excited to see. Bipartisan support in the legislature.
And it's unfortunate that the short session can't deal with this, because bipartisan usually means you could move towards something, especially when you're just referring it back to the voters, that could take things to the next level. But
Yeah.
It's good that there are leaders like yourself that are talking about this, that understand the industry and are getting the dialogue going, because even some Republicans probably don't know about this and might say, well, why don't we just say the heck with all that stuff, and and not find common ground on something like nuclear, but nuclear that's safe, where they know how to deal with the waste disposal in a safe manner. That always made sense.
It does, and it actually has a very good safety record if you compare it with other energy sources. And I trying to remember where that data is. I can find that, but it has a very strong safety record.
I just posted the article, by the way, that I think talked about. It didn't mention.
Oh yeah,
yeah, it's the Catalyst one, and it tells the history, so folks can read that there, and it talks about how the idea that you guys were proposing,
great,
referring back to the people. So, well, this is two big issues that have been in front of people. Like, a lot of people say, what does the state legislature have to do with me? Well, Measure 110 and all the stuff that came
got it.
And then energy.
I think I hope people are waking up. I know I woke up. We focus so much on what's going on nationally, and absolutely that's important. I can't control much about what goes on nationally. I can vote and I can complain. That's it. But what we as citizens, Oregon citizens, have control over is what happens locally. And if we ignore what's happening locally, we do it at our peril, because bit by bit, slowly, we are letting our institutions have been taken over by people who don't share my values, for darn sure.
Yeah.
So if we want to take this country back, we take our state back. We take our state back by taking our city back, taking our library back, taking our school back, taking our county back. Start within the realm of influence that you do have. Grow it from there. Engage with your city council, run for city council. Engage with your school board, run for school board. That's what it's going to take our institutions back, and nobody else is going to do it but us. Nobody else is going to do it for us. And that's why I'm doing this crazy job, Kevin.
It is a crazy job.
Because I can't just sit on the sidelines and complain. I have energy. I think I have good ideas. And I'm going to fight. I'm going to fight for what's right in this state.
Oh, I appreciate that you're there doing that, and that you're definitely one of the most articulate and forthright legislators. You've spoken out on a whole range of topics, including ones that people say, well, you shouldn't talk about that. And it's like, we'll
Well,
talk about it. You might have seen this, but and I can send it to you because it's unfair for me sort of to mention it without sending it to you. But there's a teacher or a coach in Canby who just resigned from their
yeah,
position. Do you know about that?
I do know about that, and I did post on that.
Tennis
It's
coach.
yeah, I I'm disheartened that he left. Unfortunately, he's a great teacher, but I completely understand why he did. And so it's pretty sad. But the sad thing is we're losing more and more teachers like that
Yeah.
over this craziness. But I have been pretty outspoken on that issue, and I'm not beholden to anybody. I'm beholden to I'm trying to do what's right. I look at each policy on its merits, uh, and I try and do what's right. Um, and my values and my principles are reflected in the decisions that I'm making, and I listen to both sides, uh, and I search for common ground where I can. And if we don't have common ground, I'm going to fight you. So,
Right. And we're going to let the public hear our arguments.
yeah,
And then eventually they get to weigh in. And now that we know how they're going to weigh in on Measure 110, almost certainly, finally, the process is maybe being influenced in a direction where we've got a chance at fixing that.
yeah,
And of course, you just said about take back your school board. This issue in Canby, they're dealing with the fact that girls are not going to be safe in a sport where men are competing against them,
yeah.
and the physical differences are so great.
So on that front, I should mention I do have a bill to bring school choice to Oregon, establish education savings accounts, and that it is identical to an initiative petition that I have called Initiative Petition 30. And there's a few school choice measures out there which are all great. We're just taking a slightly different approach, but I think the time is right for Oregon to implement school choice.
I think I saw an article today that said somewhere in the 70% range of parents are looking to change to a different school if they could.
Yeah, yeah. I was just, I have Salem Kaiser schools in my district, and I have Cascade High School Cascade in my district. Um, it's testament to what local control can do to have some influence over how their schools are run. Uh, Salem Kaiser schools are run a lot differently than Cascade schools.
That I've heard.
Salem Kaiser schools, people are leaving. They've lost thousands of students. There's a waiting list to get into Cascade. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to know. We have the ability, if we take control of our schools, and local people on the school board can hire the right people. It matters a lot.
So some of the kind of woke DEI aristocracy, if you can't get their attention by telling what you think about the system that they're in, you can get their attention if the money follows the child out of the district to another school system.
Yeah.
They'll care about it then a great deal more, won't they?
So yeah, our bill does education savings account. So it uses public funds that could go toward a private school or homeschooling. It expands charter schools. There's a cap at 3%. It extends it to 6%. And then we reinstate open enrollment. So you can go to the public school of your choice. You don't have to necessarily live in that district.
Wow.
Yeah.
That would really make a difference. Well, this has been a great show here tonight. Thanks for staying on the whole time. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great to see you again. Appreciate it.
Likewise. I mean, it's great being able to share with folks what you're doing, and the fact that I think they also need to know that they need to speak up and support what you're doing, and many others, because the public's voice is supposed to still matter in this process.
Oh man, we could spend a whole whole session on that, Kevin. I get. I talk to a lot of people. I do sessions all over my district, and uh, I know what people want to see and want to hear and what's important to the citizens, but that's not necessarily represented in that building. I've got lobby groups knocking on my door in that building. I've got a lot of special interest groups. Some of them align with my community, some of them don't. So
Yeah.
the priorities are shifted in there. And the only way that I see we shift that back is if we get more balance in that building.
Well, and that means making sure that this fall we remember what happens in this session, and we look at
Yeah.
how people vote and influence them there too.
You
So
got
it's
it.
the whole thing.
Yeah.
Well, Representative Deal, thank you so much for joining us here today and for informing folks of all this. And they can find out more about you and follow what you're doing. Is it eddeal.com? Do I have that correct?
Yeah. ed@eddeal.com. And I don't know if there's a way for me to chat.
If you tell me what it is, I can type it.
Yeah. So you can find me on Twitter at real_eddeal.
At real _ make sure I type this right.
Yeah.
_ Ed Deal.
Yeah. And if you go to eddeal.com, you'll find all my social media names, and I try and keep active on those. It's a great way to communicate what's going on in the building and raise awareness on issues. So please follow me.
Please do that, folks. And again, thank you, Representative Deal, for joining us here tonight in the Capitol. Yes, sir.
And I have an X Space coming up, my first ever X Space coming up on Wednesday.
Wednesday.
So, yeah. So look for that.
So they can go to that Twitter handle and find it.
You go to that Twitter handle, you'll find it in right near the top of the feed where we're showing the X Space time.
Fantastic. Looking forward to that too.
Yep.
Well, thank you, Representative, and keep up the good work. And thank you, all of you who are watching us. Please share the show with everyone you can, because a lot of folks don't know any of this, including friends and people who would tend to agree with you. And they can be inspired to get involved in this process and make the difference we know we can all make if we support and fight for the right things. Have a great night, everyone, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Captive Audience tomorrow night. It should be David Darnell and myself talking about all the other crazy news that's going on in the world.